I'm just going to welcome everyone to the city's affordable housing community meeting. It's April 6th, 2022. The meeting's being audio and video recorded. I just ask if people speak to make any comment, if you could state your name for the record and for minutes keeping. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kathy and Deanna.
Hey, hi everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight because it is surprisingly chilly. So we'll just start by doing the PowerPoint, which will kind of give you a broad overview of what the plan is. Like we said, we do have the plan available. It's really draft. So, we'll go through, we'll clean it up. When my eyes look at it after a while, I don't see the mistakes. So that's how we're going to do it. All right, we can go to the first slide. So just so everybody knows, this was a public act that was enacted that we have to do an affordable housing plan. It's due by June 1st of 2022. This is a way for every community to look at what they have for affordable housing and decide if they need to take steps to do something to try to get up to the minimum standard, which is 10% affordable housing in the community. Go ahead. Again, this is just sort of the background of it and the cover page of the plan. So affordable housing is that in which usually lower income households, but most households in general, pay no more than 30% of their income towards housing costs. By that, we need your rent, your mortgage, your property taxes, and your utilities. So if you look at what you pay, you might be able to decide, am I paying too much or am I where I should be? So we're planning for housing. Why? Everybody needs housing. And we need housing that's affordable, available, when we need it, where we need it. Obviously, if you have children, you don't want to be moving out of school districts and things like that if you don't have to. And we want to have options. No one wants to know that you can only go to one neighborhood or one street or one area to live. We want options and we want choices. So planning for housing. Again, it's from a diversity of housing choices. First and foremost is shelter and personal safety. Those are the things people look for when they're looking for housing. Financial stability and security. How are you going to protect yourself if the rents go up? How do you save any money? How do you do all of that? And a sense of belonging. What are the opportunities that the community provides and the neighborhood provides? So we look for housing options for people, a variety of people, because we have, if you look at the aging here, we have people that are coming up. That are going to be sort of the single young adults that are going to be living in the area. We have a big bubble of people that are going to be going into their 60s. And then we have a decent sized group of, an older population. So we're looking for a stronger economy and community togetherness. So when looking at everything, one of the things that we knew, but it also was proven out in the numbers, is that we have some of the most affordable housing in the region in Norwich. Our housing prices are much less than those of our neighbors. And it may not be a crisis, but it is a concern because census data indicated about 49% of Norwich renter households are cost burdened, which means they're spending more than 30% of their income on housing. That's roughly half of the people that are renting are anything can cause a crisis. One doctor bill crisis. So 23% of homeowners with no mortgage are cost burdened. So for a lot of those, I think we're looking more towards the elderly population or the handicapped population, people who are on very fixed incomes. That's anecdotal. I don't have proof of that. 26% of homeowners with mortgages are cost burdened. So we have some of the lowest housing costs. We still have some of the people with the highest cost burdens. Ms. Tara will tell you she's with the Human Services Department. That's a scary thing to have in the community. It's a lack of stability for the families and the children and whoever else is living in the house. So the other part of that is our median household income in Norwich is well below that of those in New London County. And you're going to have it here. It's $55,391, which is $15,900, almost $16,000 less than other towns in New London County, and $20,000 less than overall in Connecticut. So what we know is more and more people are finding it harder and harder to be able to afford housing. It may not be in crisis yet, but it's a concern. Because we have people who already live here that are in, just one step away from crisis. So when we look at the housing overview, what we have, Norwich is a little unique compared to some of the other towns in the region, in the fact that for a single family detached, we're at 42%. That usually represents a larger segment of the population in most of the towns that are around us. Obviously, we have a lot of rural towns around us. So, that kind of shifts. But 42% is single family detached, as opposed to two to family, almost 41%, and 5+ units, 24%. Single family detached works in a lot of communities. Clearly in Norwich, it's not as big a concern as having the availability in the more dense housing. The other part of it is this another interesting thing that I dug up when I was mining data. Is only 43% of Norwich's housing is owner occupied. So that's a pretty high number to have for owner occupied. 42% of our housing is rental and maybe more affordable. And there is a vacancy rate that's shown in here. It showed it at 15%. I think that's a little high. I think the data was a couple years old, but that's what it was showing. So when we look at what it means for affordable housing, we're looking at basically what are assisted units. And when we look at assisted units, a lot of people will think, well, there's got to be even more than that. But the reality of it is there are a lot of Section 8 housing choice vouchers, things like that are out there, other types of subsidies and things. If they're not project-based, which means that, I built a project and I'm guaranteed those Section 8 vouchers to that project, that means that you basically have housing choice. You can take that voucher, go to any time you want. So it's not included in the numbers here. So that would skew the numbers even a little bit further. So right now, Norwich has a total of 3,572 assisted housing units, 562 are CHFA and USDA mortgages, and 2,221 are government assisted, and then tenant rental assistance is 789. So again, like I say, there are a lot of other types of programs out there that might provide some type of a rental assistance.
What is tenant rental assistance?
I think that's, excuse me, worse than this that happened in church. So, and I went with her Ash Wednesday. And the one senior was there, and I'm like, yeah, it's my life. Those are usually project-based tenant rental assistance. If they're counted in that, then it's supposed to be project-based.
Like a housing.
Would that be like a Section 8 housing?
So the difference is again, if I built units and I had a guarantee of those units for 20 years to have Section 8 units, they're project-based. If you walk in to get assistance someplace and you're able to walk out with a Section 8 voucher, you can take that and go someplace with it. You don't have to stay in Norwich with it. It's a housing choice voucher. And our housing authority administers housing choice vouchers. But like our housing authority has things that are either state or federal, and they're low income, low moderate income housing. It becomes a whole, looking at everything.
I always remember project stays with the unit.
Right.
Housing choice stays with the person.
Right. So that's what it is. And then when you look at the housing too, we would consider those naturally occurring affordable housing units, which are the aging, smaller, older, fixer-uppers, those types of things. That again aren't counting. They're not in that because they're not deed restricted. They're not, project-based Section 8. They're not a plethora of other federal programs that they could be or state programs. So we know that we do have quite a few that still fit in that range because there's data on it, and looking at it, you can see that we do still have some that are in that range. It's problematic. So Norwich current. So again, what I started out saying was that we need to have 10%. That's the de minimis that the state sets forward to have for affordable housing in your community. So that's 10%. We have 19.34% of our housing is considered affordable, which clearly the data shows that even though it's affordable, there may not be truly affordable housing for a lot of people in the community. but we've met the test as far as the state is concerned for what we need to have for housing.
So, I'm sorry.
Yep.
So this is where what you're saying is confusing,
Okay. It is.
because we're saying that we know that for the people who live there are looking to rent,
Mhm.
it may not be affordable
Correct,
at the rate that it's set.
correct.
So how does the state then determine that we
Because-
have 19.34% of affordable housing?
Because those are the ones that are guaranteed. So when the state is looking at the house, when they're looking at this for affordable housing, they're looking at how many units of guaranteed affordable housing you have. So Norwich Housing Authority and the number of units they have. Panema Mill, because they got low income housing tax credits, X amount of those units are set aside for low moderate income people. The Warregan Art Space, all these different places that at one time got some type of funding either from the federal or state government, that for so many years they have to keep that housing affordable. That's what's counted in that 19.34%. That's what's counted. The other thing that we do talk about here is, so there's affordable housing, which that is considered to be because of the restrictions that are on it. And then we have what we call the affordability of housing, sort of more of the social and economic issue that goes around people who, as we see in here, are, making low wages, because we're one of the lowest, in the area, older housing stock, those types of things. So again, we talk about affordability is one thing, affordable housing is something else, which I had to struggle a little bit with that myself. So again, what would happen is if we didn't have the 10%, we would have to come up with a plan as to how we chose to meet that. Or there's an exception to the rule where I think you don't have, Deanna can probably speak better to it, but you don't have to follow the zoning necessarily in the town if you don't meet the rule or have a plan to increase.
So I can speak really briefly about that. 8-30G is a statute in Connecticut that if you don't have enough affordable housing in your community, that a developer actually has the ability to come into your community and build affordable housing. The zoning regulations are actually displaced. They come out of the picture because you haven't met your 10%. So it really put in place so that communities in Connecticut and different towns can't exclude affordable housing. They can't not deal with it. They can't. So what they did is allow the statute, which is like, all right, you don't want to deal with this. This developer wants to build it. Because sometimes they would come in and they find reasons in zoning that maybe if you don't have enough plantings or you're it's too close to the wetlands or something, they would find reasons to deny affordable housing. So the statute was created. So it said, if you don't meet that 10%, we're going to force your hand. And you're going to, now the zoning regulations are out of the picture and you have to, look at this development. And the criteria is very, very difficult for community then to deny it because the zoning regulations are out of that, And so the goal in Connecticut for most small towns or communities of wealth are to make sure that they get to their 10% because otherwise they have no control over aesthetics, they have no control over what comes into their communities, and they worry about that. Oh, we don't, the NIMBY attitude or
Right.
But beyond that is the local controls that we have for zoning about protection potentially of wetlands or protection or the aesthetics that a community wants for plantings and those kind of things go out the window. So the push is for communities to get to your 10%. But there's so many communities in Connecticut that aren't on their 10%. Here in Norwich, without reiterating too much, we're at the 19%. So we don't ever, as a community, have to worry about some developer coming in and going, hey, pushing their way in the door, because we've met that criteria and we're, double that 10% almost. But it doesn't mean that we don't see that the people here still need to have more affordable housing, or at least what we have to continue to improve it. Does that make sense? So, but like Kathy said, if you don't have your 10%, that 830G, the elephant in the room kicks in where those developers, so they really look for communities. Not necessarily Norwich, because we have that number, is to come in and to somewhat pounce on towns in a good way. I'm not saying in a negative way, but if those communities are putting their head in the sand and they don't want to deal with affordable housing, the developer, it's a great place to, if they can get the land at the right price and do things, they can come in and do affordable housing.
But every town don't really have NPU or utilities, which is another drawback, which that's why developers are not going to those towns. And they're coming here because they can find city sewer, city water.
Right. In this
But
region,
that is
because
also-
we're an urban center, we do have the city water, the city sewer. We do have the utilities. That makes it, it does make it easier to build more dense housing. So,
But they have found, say on the other side, that communities can't use the lack of, we don't want utilities, we don't want to put municipal sewers in our water,
right,
to use that as a way of not getting housing. They can't
Yeah.
flip that and use that again as an NB attitude to keep people out, you know, so, but there is areas that it would be difficult, you know, to, have large apartment complexes, but it doesn't mean you can't find ways to do affordable housing in different ways. And I don't know if that comes, we could talk about that when we finish the presentation, but there's other ways that communities can do affordable housing without having a 200 unit apartment building. Do you know what I'm trying to say? They
if
can
you
do
look
it
at some of the
small,
rural
small.
towns that have managed to put in elderly housing, they also don't have water and sewer, but they come up with the systems that can handle it. So it's not really a viable excuse anymore to say, but we don't have water and sewer. You wouldn't want to put elderly housing from the state standpoint.
Do you want to talk about strategies?
So, yeah, so the strategies, if we can go to the next one, Dan. Basically, the strategies are, we're gonna continue to do what we're doing now. We're gonna fund rehabilitation of existing housing stock, look to do that in any way we can, because the housing stock we have is aging. And that's part of that falls off into that sort of affordable, but not really because of the stock itself. Funding to stabilize at-risk tenants and owners. It's one of the things that we do through Community Development Block Grant. But we definitely advocate for other areas to be able to do that because it's critical. And when we say funding of rehabilitation of existing housing stock, we also mean our partners in Norwich Housing Authority to make sure that those units that they have stay updated, code compliant, and that people have a safe place to live. Support opportunities for quality, lower cost housing in any way we can. Part of that is, we've under the ARPA funds, we've funded Habitat for Humanity to do some housing in Greenville. They'll be turning over to New Orleans, I think, their 100th house. And they'll be celebrating that
Yeah,
May 2nd.
in May sometime.
Something, yeah.
But they also
Um,
have, working with the city beyond their building the houses that
Correct.
they're already building, that to work with us on the buildings, the houses that we get for foreclosure, or properties that we get for foreclosure, in evaluating with us, are those appropriate locations to do more housing and how they can do it. And they have opened their portfolio from doing just only single family houses to doing multifamily now too. And so they've kind of, they realize one lot, one house, in an urban environment may not be the best for the clients.
Right.
And they can serve more people by doing multiple units. So we're evaluating sites that, that as they come about, if we get things, the city is this a suitable one to pass on under the ARPA funds for them to use to develop housing there.
And then, of course, we want to support first-time home ownership. We think that's a great idea for anybody to be invested in the community. And as you saw, we have, a fairly low percentage of people who actually own and live in Norwich. In order to have community investment, it's always best that people, work and play and stay where they are if they can.
And on top of that, Kathy, just to touch base on that, is there is programs in the cities and some of the local banks that have
Yeah.
assisted. You know more about that than I do,
Yeah.
that have assisted people to their first, buying a home in Norwich, and you make a certain income level, and it's really helped with their down
Pay down
payments.
payments and things like that. So,
So our local banks have really been helpful to make sure that there's affordable housing and to get young people to be able to apply.
Yeah. So that's always been very helpful. And then just support aging in place. So like I said, we have a big bubble of people that are turning into the 60s now that live in Norwich. And, that's when I think people start to look and say, where am I going to be in 10 years? If I'm still walking the planet, where am I going to be? And, you start to make those considerations at that point in your life. So that sort of wrapped it up. There are a number of other things that are in the draft plan, and I say draft because we want to make sure that everybody knows that basically is in the plan of conservation and development as well. And you'll see those strategies that are in the plan, which, and I'll just go over some of them, but some of the strategies to guide residential development in ways that support overall community structure, promote an adaptive reuse of historical mills as multifamily housing, encourage conservation design of residential subdivisions, rural planning areas in order to help preserve natural resources, open space, agricultural land, and community character. As part of having a thriving community, is having a place for the community to be able to gather and have recreation. Maintain low density residential patterns in rural planning districts, provide for the creation and maintenance of housing which is affordable, and anticipate potential housing needs of an aging population. So everything in here is pretty much what we would have seen in the plan of conservation and development. And basically what we've seen when we mined through some of the data was that it still stands true, that these are the things that we need to be advocating for and we need to be looking for. As we said, the de minimis is 10%, we're at 19.34. Norwich in that sense is in a very good place. I think our bigger concern would not be the affordable housing, but the affordability of housing, which is a separate topic essentially from this, but I also think it's critical to tie it into it some because it's a huge concern for the people who live in Norwich. And obviously when we see how many people are at that level that they may not make their next rent payment if something happens or their next mortgage payment, we need to have something to be able to respond to that and to look at that and see what we can do to help people. So that's sort of where we are. You know, what we'd like is if anybody has any questions, ideas, thoughts, input.
So, I mean, I know there's obviously this is the draft and plan, but like what's the financial piece of this? If someone has a large piece of property that they want to put potentially Section 8 housing on, let's just say, right now it's an empty lot. What are the resources? Is there funding to make that happen? Because
So not necessarily. So I would say, you know, if a developer wanted to do something, they would work with our office, the planning department, and they would fall under our zoning regulations, or if you were subdividing your land out, that would be a different, you know, different process. And we don't have anything in our regulations that say a certain number of your units have to be affordable. Some communities have it. That's a way they get that 10%, is if we make every time someone does an apartment complex or they do a 2-unit, you know, development, one of them has to be affordable. That's the way they piecemeal their way up. Since we have that number in the 19% here, there's no trigger for us for the city to require that, you know, of anyone. It doesn't mean we dissuade either. So if someone comes in and says, we want to do an affordable housing project, and we're gonna gear it towards these deed restricted units, and this is what we want to do in a targeted, because that's where our financing is going to be based on that. Because a lot of times they get special federal financing and to be able to do those kind of housing. And I better sure doesn't matter to us, because you're building housing is quality housing, and it's good. So the fact that it's affordable is terrific. But those units, in most cases of new affordable housing, you can't tell the difference between what's an affordable unit and a market rate unit. So that's the whole goal. When you go into a development and I'm walking through and doing an inspection, I don't notice the difference between those units, because they may have, instead of having the granite countertop, maybe they put something else in instead of that, you know, but those are things, but they're living in the same quality of life and living. So as far as money from the city necessarily, I don't speak from behalf of the council or anybody like that, but there isn't a program that we have or that's specifically related to that. But there is assessment deferrals, the programs there, which is like a tax deferral program. If you're in like an enterprise zone, we have opportunity zones in the city, which are federally recognized for if you haven't what's the word I want to say, the investment, you have capital gains that you want to invest, they're protected, but that's like not even anything to do with us. It's all a financial end on the developer's end. But they look for land that's in the opportunity zones. They're going to look for land that's in the enterprise zones, because that's going to be good for them on top of everything else. It makes their package, their financial package great for them. But from a city standpoint, from the planning and zoning standpoint, your project is a great, you know, it's a project. We want a good project. You know, it doesn't matter to me if you came in and said I'm doing affordable or not. And it wouldn't be, you know, would neighbors ask? Possibly. We talked about NIMBYism a little bit, but it doesn't matter. That's not how we make decisions. It's not based on that. So whether, you know, and a lot of times that is never, it is not disclosed, and it doesn't need to be disclosed. There's no reason when you're doing development that you ever need to disclose this is a, you know, doing a low income housing project. You're doing a housing project in the city of Norwich. So we like to keep it at that level. Does that answer your question?
it doesn't. Sorry,
you-
I was asking if there's any financial opportunity, not incentive based from the town, obviously it's past, surpassed that 10%. Where a developer can come in and just make
Yeah.
make the rules. I mean, what are the resources for someone that's interested in developing an area, to maybe get funding to start a project?
So that's what I'm saying,
something like
I don't know
We
of any
wouldn't know those.
programs that
Okay.
have that,
Honestly, that we don't have an answer to.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the answer.
but I guess that's the answer, but you may not be the money up front, but if you were a developer and you were looking at that, I would look at, is this an opportunity zone? All right, then I can get someone for capital gains, they wanna
Right.
invest in this project, this is a good project for investors. Oh, we're in the enterprise zone, that automatically kicks certain things from our tax assessor's office that doesn't need to go before the council, it's automatically,
Yep.
have assessment deferral. So there's things that maybe aren't money up front, if that makes sense, but there's advantageous ways to look at it to make sure where you're developing, or if they're coming to see me and they said, hey, I have a big investor that wants to do capital gains, wants to use opportunity zones. Well, here's where the city's opportunity zones are. So it's not money up front, but it's all part of that package if you're coming in for the deal, if that makes sense.
Yeah, where can we get more resources about these opportunity zones?
I can give you some, but I can also send you over to Norwich Community Development Corporation, which is our economic development arm of the city. It's the nonprofit arm of the city that deals with economics, and we're like a team. So, you can come through the process of economic development and say, I have a project, like, if you met with me and I would say, okay, bring NCDC in to answer those kind of questions. Or you go through their door and say, hey, I want to do this project. He's going to talk to you about some of that stuff and say, here, deal with the planning and zoning department. So we like to think that we have two doorways to get into the same process, and we'll get you through that process. But NCDC would be the one that would know what monies are available. for
Yeah, I think that
economic.
was the next step there for
Yeah.
sure.
Okay with that. And the other thing I just want to say is just to let everybody know that, a medium, like, somebody at the higher end of the median income for a family of four in Norwich, it's $79,900. So it's not, when people think of low and moderate income, I think they don't always think that somebody can be making $80,000 a year, which, I'm saying for a family of four is a lot of money, but it's not bad. So, that's what you have to look at, and people don't understand that. So you could have a single mom teenage, who works at the school, who, she could be making $80,000 a year as a teacher, because she's been there for a while and has a master's degree, otherwise she's not, and that's who your neighbor could be in a finance moderate income housing.
And, and the word with affordable housing, and that's what the statute, the state statute is, but, from Connecticut's standpoint, at least, in affordable housing, we like to say that workforce housing. It's people, it's not creating people's misunderstanding, and not the people at this table is, affordable housing is people who aren't working, and it's the old tenement houses that, they're subsidized. It's not that, it's workforce housing, and it's people who are the teachers and maybe police officers to just start jobs, they're at a lower income. People who work at the casinos, these are, people who have jobs that are working and have a livelihood, have a family, or maybe they don't have family. But that they are, it's not, it's just them to be able to meet, like you said, the no more
That's
than
who
30%.
affordable housing accommodates.
Yeah. And it's to make sure that they have a wage to live on, and that they're not using more than 30% of their income for
Right.
housing. And that's really the goal, is to try to get people to be living and housing that they can afford.
What would be the incentive for a developer to create housing that was, 30% or below the average? Because obviously, the average median incomes are quite a bit lower than the rest of Connecticut. What would be the incentive for someone to do that and not just go to another town?
Well, the incentive in Norwich is the fact that we do have the water, the sewer. Our zoning is very favorable for that kind of density. A lot of the other towns are not favorable. And that's sort of the reason why the state, it's the reason the state has dictated that communities have to do this. I mean, for someone like Norwich to have to write up an affordable housing plan is almost silly, because we're at the 19.34%. But if you look at the other towns in the area, they're not there. So, and that's the problem. But I live in a smaller town too. We're not there. And it'll be interesting to see what they're drafting up to say what they're going to do, because that's the way it is.
Biggest catch is, I think, You don't have to spend 20 grand on septic systems, 10 grand on the well. You know, so utilities in Norwich is a very major thing that brings development to Norwich. That we do have a big infrastructure of the utilities, getting the NPU gas. You know, you can equip your houses with the, efficiency furnaces. You have gas lines here. There's city water, city sewer, which is a very big catch, and especially in the enterprise zone and opportunity zones, you can save some money through that if you're buying something in those areas and developing something in those areas.
Yeah, there's programs through our Norwich community, through Norwich Public Utilities when you fall into those areas. One thing, housing is allowed in all the zones that we allow for it, and that's specifically in here. However, housing is probably more receptive where there is sewer and water, which is not everywhere in the city, obviously, And if you look at the residential density plan that's in our POCD, and it's on this page 12, it kind of shows where the clusters are. There's really dense housing, obviously, downtown. That's where you have it. And then you have areas that, kind of grow out, and you'll see areas that are pretty white. And that's where this less dense, and that's probably most likely because the sewers aren't really there. There's probably lots of wetlands in those areas or natural resources, not necessarily where you want to cluster a larger development, let's just say. But it doesn't mean affordable housing can be done again. It can be, right now in our regulations is unique to Norwich is when you do a accessory apartment if you want to do an accessory apartment at your house in Norwich, you make that apartment deed restricted. So there, if there's something on file deed that says that unless it's rented to your family member, if you're renting it, it's deed restricted to be that, So we already in the small way say, hey, you want to put that accessory apartment, you're going to build it on there, and you're going to charge someone, $3,000 a month to live there. You're doing that accessory apartment. You can have a family member live there, whatever, but once you start renting it, it's on the land records as being deed restricted. So we take small steps anyways, even though like Kathy has reiterated, we were at 19, almost 20%, but we still want to see quality housing come in. That's the goal, is in people who are buying multifamilies, if they talk to us, they have a right to deed restrict their own units too. There's nothing that prevents them to doing that. And when they get money from CDBG to do rehab, they have to be correct. Are you sure about that?
They do, but it's a short period, so it's not really.
But we know at least for that short period, if they're getting money from CDBG, from community development to do rehab in a house, there's a restriction for a short amount of time that those units that they're upgrading their homes, that it needs to be someone that falls within those criteria. So. Anything that, the plan is, you can look it over. It is the draft plan. It's very draft. It's going to be filed in the clerk's office by Friday. We're going to make typos, check the typos, do a second reading of it. But we'd like to see if there's anything, besides specific questions with projects, is there anything about affordable housing that you want to add?
So one of the questions I have is, are there any current, I believe most of these were federally funded, I don't believe they were state funded under the affordable housing. Are any of them, their mortgages coming due? Expiring,
Yeah.
that will allow them to flip to moderate rate?
I don't know right now. I know that has happened before in Norwich, and we've had some pretty large family housing providers that have come to the end of their mortgage and privatize. And so I don't know that. I could find that out, I'm sure. At what date they're set to expire.
That creates a major, so that creates a major issue. It created a major issue.
It did.
The casinos, and I'm not in the casino, they were lower paying jobs. And so when that housing was large, when it expired and they changed it all to make it rate, it really had an impact on what people could afford, and we saw the mass exodus out. The other piece of it that I have is with housing that be honest, I don't remember all the things that are unless they're under the housing authority.
Right.
There were some that used to be designated affordable housing.
Mhm.
The mortgages that expired, they converted them. They still, if they maintain X number of units, designated as affordable units?
Once they expire?
Yes.
No, they don't, I don't believe they have to. That's, my understanding of it, is that they don't have
They
to.
don't,
Mhm.
okay. So would they?
But I could be wrong. Jeff, do you know anything about that?
You're,
Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
So the question was, and I don't know if you know anything about this, but sort of the private entities that have the mortgages that, restrict them from, that they have to rent to low and mod. When those mortgages expire, are they required to keep any percentage of those low and moderate income?
I don't believe so if they opt out, but most times if there's project-based vouchers involved with that,
Yep.
the people living there do get a voucher and can
Right.
move on. But if they don't have vouchers, I'm not exactly sure how that works. I haven't dealt with that.
All right, that's what I thought, but I just wanted to check in with you on that.
Yep.
That's Jeff Arn, the Executive Director of the Norwich Housing Authority.
What is the minimum percentage of units that needs to be here to qualify as a project, as an affordable housing project? Or that all the unit 100% needs to be affordable housing?
from a city standpoint,
No.
we don't, like I said,
Yeah.
we don't, a multifamily development project or a multifamily one house, we don't
We don't
track that,
really-
we don't require that.
Right.
So
So that's the
whatever you
hard-
call.
But if you're
If
like,
you're taking those financing.
right, if you're like
Government
Panema, which we know got, low income housing tax credit funding, they have a certain percentage they have to keep, but off the top of my head, I don't remember how many units it was. I don't remember. But they have to keep that percentage.
I thought it was like minimum 20% that you have to maintain. But I guess it depends on
Around there.
financing.
Yeah, it all depends, each one of them has a different financing component that goes with it, so. And I don't know the intricacies of financing on this stuff at all.
Question, so going with the affordability issue, which is not the same as the affordability. Is there any discussion? Where would that discussion happen? Talk about first of all, there's a couple of things, not just the affordability, but the quality of housing
Yes,
stock that we
Right.
have in this city.
correct.
That's a bigger issue.
It is, and, I know that obviously Deanna works with Flight and trying to correct some of those issues. It is difficult, and I hate to say it, but without really a flourishing Blight program, it's kind of hard to keep on top of the houses. I mean, years ago, they did have an inspection program, right? You can't do that with, one Blight official. So that becomes problematic to try to manage that type of a thing. I agree with you. We offer a program, it's 0% interest for 10 years. People can come in and get a loan to repair their property, and we're having a hard time getting people coming in and applying for it.
So that
So-
would be owner occupied?
No,
No.
no.
So part of that from historical is that, again, when you have a blight officer
Mhm,
and they're being cited, okay,
mhm.
you will have them at your door. But as long as the city is not citing anyone, and I don't know what the number in this town is, that I go back to the 90s, we used to have a high percentage of investor owned properties where they didn't even live in the area.
That's what we have
We
now.
still have
So we
that.
still have.
That's what we have now.
Um,
And
So,
that's a problem.
no,
I was just gonna say, I mean, Blight has been citing, we've had an enormous number of condemnations in the Human Services
Mhm.
Office this year.
Which is housing code, not blight. Blight is aesthetics outside, like not anything dangerous. Housing code is the things that make it safe
Right.
and you can't live there. So we have both departments. So.
Right.
Yeah, but people aren't repairing their properties, or some landlords have tried to, but with supply chain issues, and getting people to do the work, They've not been able to repair units in time for, their building not to be condemned, so it's been a rough year.
And
And I don't know what, yeah.
Condemnations are
means moving,
expensive,
and
too.
it means moving people out of those units, so
we've had a
there's
lot
that
of-
balance of, you know, people want to call because they're living in rough housing situations. But there's a chance when we go in there that we're like, this is really dangerous, and the code officials like, you can't stay here, that now you're displacing them. So, and that's where the Human Services Department comes in, and there's a real partnership to decide, you know, what things minimally can be done to kind of keep them there and do things. Or is this a condemnation and it's got, you know, and if it's a multifamily house, it's not necessarily, you know, you're displacing, and it's not a single family thing, we don't do this is renting, you know. So if you're a multifamily house, you have 2 units, well, that's tough. But if you have multiple, you know, it's a big apartment complex, you know, big building, old building that's been converted. Now we're talking displacing a lot of people, a lot of families too.
I agree with you, it's a really big problem. I don't know what our answer is, so.
I don't either, but I do think it's something that we should be discussing and looking at and trying to figure out what we can possibly do about it. I mean, I don't think we can do much about investor owners that people buy property and, you know.
And the same thing, it's hard on private developers also to say, before you leave, I want to catch you, is there anything else you would like to add before?
No, just answer.
Thank you, we'll definitely contact NCDC and.
You're staying, right? It's just I have to leave.
No, I'm.
Oh, you got to leave.
Yeah.
also.
It's
Right, thank you.
found stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's good seeing,
Nice to see you.
Yeah.
See you.
Look forward
I
to
am
hearing
so
from you
hot
about
here.
your project, so let me know. All right, take care.
They're sitting there with
But as
the
far
phone.
as housing, going back to that comment, is, you know, it's very difficult because once you cite someone and you start getting into like just even the white of how their exterior of their house you're now costing them some money. And if you're already in a situation that you're living in, or housing and it's not in great shape, in some cases, and probably I would say most cases, you may not have the money to do the repairs on your home or the repairs to make it look better. And again, Kathy has this program, and at that point, what we've done is targeted our blight housing code enforcement officer to say, you know, that I don't have the money to do this, then we can channel them to community development and say, hey, well, there is money available.
But we don't get many that way, to be honest with you. And, you know, we keep a very high loan to value ratio in our program too. And you'd be surprised how many people still don't qualify. You know, we allow up to 140% of loan to value in order to be able to assist houses. And it's problematic.
I just know, you know, we can identify. We have to come up with a solution.
Yeah.
Or solutions. I don't
Yeah.
know there's one way
Right.
to address it. But I can say to you, it is, you know, unfortunately, the impact of the pandemic is actually, you know,
Has made it much
has
more
made it
difficult to
like
do
that.
everything. Yep.
But it's also, I'm going to also say, as I say about healthcare, about education, about everything, is that it has brought it to the town in front and center for the city has to start to deal with it. We can no longer just act like that neighborhood or that section or that back street, just, you know, let it continue to, you know, be under an unperforming housing stock.
Right.
That we no longer have that kind of issue. So, you know, I understand this, there's the affordable housing plan.
Right.
That's dictated and
Right.
mandated.
And as far as affordable housing, we're fine.
Right.
As far as affordability of housing, and I saw the article you had,
Yeah, the
so-
rent relief system.
Right,
So
that
that's the solution to 49% people who
That-
cannot afford to pay
Right,
their rents.
that's 49% of the
Yeah, it's a
population,
big
you know, the
population.
rental population. And that means, you know, like for Tara's office, you know, like really that's like a month away from major problems, you know?
This needs to be addressed federally,
Right.
you know.
And you know, like I said, I put it in the plan for affordable housing, even though the state's really not as interested in that part of it. But I did think it was critical for Norwich to understand really where the balance of that was and to you know, to start a discussion maybe on what do we do about this? Like, how do we work this out? What do we do? Can we do anything?
Now, does these 49% people have any resources if they want to apply for something with the TVCCA or Norwich Housing Authority to assist them with the rent? Do they even know all the,
Well, the
because
thing
that's
is,
the
is
thing,
that
if you are
most
not
of
in
them-
that,
most of, like, even with TVCCI or even with Tara's program, you have stopgap financing, so they can go in and they can help them, but they can only help them for a short period of time, and then they're on their own. So, and once they've come through the program, they can't come through it again. I mean, at least for like another year or two, or whatever the parameters are. So, like I said, when you're at 49% of Norwich renter households, the reality of it is, your car breaks down, somebody gets sick, you miss work, you don't get paid. Now you're on the other side of it, and that's, not a great place. And it's, that lack of stability for families and for children in particular, is something I think that really does need to be looked at.
I just like to put on the record the people who left, because I didn't get their names on the record. So, Bob Adams was, is that Kingsman Hill Road? I can't read.
Yeah.
Bob
That's where he
Adams,
lives in
60
Lisbon.
Kingsman Hill Road in Lisbon. Paula Adams at 60 Kingsman Hill Road in Lisbon. Sarah Adams Benicak, it's Benicak, 152 Main Street, East Hampton, Connecticut. Tim Benicak, 152 Main Street, East Hampton, Connecticut. We have Sheila Hayes here, 382 Laurel Hill Avenue, and then we have Swanjeet Singh at 56 Briar Hill Road. So I just wanted people to know who they were. So that's who we have here. Sorry, Dan, we didn't have people say their names as they were going around talking. We also have Matthew here, Norwich Bulletin. So he is our reporter that's here this evening. Thank you. Does anyone have any last minute comments or questions? And
This goes on file, you said this.
So
It'll be on file on
on
Friday. We have to just, this was my rough draft of it, and, I guess there are typos. So we'll go back and we'll just clean it up some, and I don't think much will change in here as far as that goes, except just to clean it up. And then it'll go on file at the city clerk's on June 8th. It will go to, Friday, and then it will go to the city council on.
in June, the first meeting in
first meeting in
June.
June.
I don't remember the date off the top. I apologize. Dan, do you have that handy from an email that I sent you?
June 1st.
It is, but I thought it was going in
No,
May.
it's in May. No, I'm sorry, we were in this
May
it's an email. Dan's looking at, yeah, it needs to be, I believe, in the clerk's office, and Dan can verify this for me, because I sent it specifically in the email. 35 days is like a review period in the clerk's office, so people can look at it, and then it'll be in front of the council. So it is a May meeting. I'm gonna have it.
I didn't read the exact date I was looking for, so this review period is also public comment.
Yes.
period.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is,
Okay.
it is. It is, so then, if we get comments, because it will go before the public, before the council,
Right.
and then at the time that's before the council, we'll have those comments, so we can, in theory, bring them to the council to say, hey, there's a few more comments
So-
that.
And again, we don't really think that this is gonna change much, because
Dan's wants
it
to-
really is about, are we meeting the 10%? And if we're not meeting the 10%, how do we plan on getting there? Will it be
We
almost
already-
20%?
exactly.
We're not really worried about it. We went through the exercise, we did it, I'm glad we did, because I think it brought up some of the information, like I said, the 49%, I wasn't aware of that. I knew that there were people that were cost burdened, I didn't know there were that many people that were cost burdened. So I think that, anytime you do this type of a thing, you do get that deeper dive and you begin to look at things, so, things surface. But as far as the rest of it goes, we're pretty.
Dan, can you tell us those dates though, right now in the email?
Sure, it's gonna go to the city clerk this Friday, April 8th. And then the city council meeting is May 16th.
16.
So the 35 days it's with the clerk is a public comment period. And then you could comment at the city council meeting.
Right.
That needs to be adopted by June 1st.
Yes, so that gives them a little bit of time if they have to.
Right, I'm really more for the public who may not have
Absolutely.
shown up. or-
Yep.
So Matthew,
Yep.
you can make sure you put that, that.
The dates in there, so
clerk's
people
office
know.
on Friday, and they have some time to review that once that's there.
It'll be posted online as well.
And May 18th will be a good opportunity for public comments.
For anybody else that hasn't come forward yet.
And like, I think Kathy did a terrific job with explaining that, you know, our affordable housing plan is gonna be completely different from many, because we have that as the criteria.
Yeah.
Ours really is that part of sidebar discussion is really affordability,
Right,
quality, how do we get existing housing stock improved? Those are, you know, some of those recommendations sort of are in here, but it's really not about the affordable housing plan, which is, you know, how do you get to that number and how do you encourage it? So, I mean.
and I struggled about put it in, don't put it in, put it in, don't put it in, and then I finally just said, I'm putting it in.
About
Because-
affordability.
About
No,
affordability,
it's
know.
because people have to understand the difference.
right,
Because
yeah,
I'll tell you, as I emailed out to people, and I'm disappointed that.
Yeah.
And I will say, I'm disappointed that we didn't have more people come to understand.
Yep.
Is that the comments that come back though, is that people really have to understand what, it is an affordability issue in the
Right.
city.
right,
We have affordable housing.
right.
But what they really want to address is the affordability.
That is, and I think, you know, I did get a comment, over the weekend, a woman had written me an email about it, and I think that's sort of what it made me say, I have to put something in here about it, because I know this is gonna, once I saw the numbers, this is gonna be a critical issue.
I mean, developers, I'm sorry, developers that come to us, we don't ask that question of, you know, are you gonna do affordable units or not? But we've seen the last few developers, besides the name of, like, you know, that wanna do market rate, because to them, they're putting a lot of money into their units, they wanna get those higher paying job people, like the electric boats and those that, which are still, some of them are lower paying jobs.
Some of them are low.
But they, you know, so there's a
Lower.
lot of regional, you know, drive to come here, so, I mean, and we do want beautiful and quality housing, but we can't tell the developers that you have to do affordable housing, there's nothing in our regulations that say that, and because we don't have anything to really force us to do that, there's not really a reason to do that.
Or
So-
anything to offer them except for.
Yeah.
You know,
And the good question was that, like, the woman that was here this evening, and the question is, well, what do we get to offer you to come and do affordable housing here? Well, in another community, they might be that lower than that 10%, they might be able to come up with something
Well,
and say, well,
certainly,
the
you know,
land or
where they
whatever,
live, they could go in and do that.
in Lisbon.
Lisbon or East
Hampton.
Hampton, you know, those towns aren't gonna meet the 10%. Those are towns where they could go in and say, we're not gonna do we're gonna bump your zoning, and,
but here's the
you
thing,
know.
I don't know if they were welcoming to affordable housing or if they are welcoming to affordable housing.
They may not
We were
be.
open to that idea,
Correct.
that's the reason
Yes.
now we are up to 20%
Correct,
instead of 10%.
right,
Plus
Right. And the
utilities have,
amenities, yep,
Mhm.
that makes a difference, makes a big
Big
difference, so,
But the state also wants, and I get it, and I understand, you don't want to centralize all your affordable housing in your cities and say, you know
Correct.
what? The cities in it's a historical thing of the cities are where there's trouble, the cities is where all the cheap housing is, you don't want to live in the cities. So, and that's kind of what's happened over the years, a lot of affordable housing, if you go down the list, you see it in New Haven and Hartford and Bridgeport and, you know, here and, you know, and other cities. And some of the towns have, you know, have made that numbers too, but a lot of them haven't because they live near a city and they're like, let them take the affordable housing,
That's
let them.
right.
So now the state is saying, no,
no
everybody
more,
gets their
everybody
fair
gets
share.
10%.
And
You know, everybody gets at least 10% because we're spreading it.
and the whole
So
thing
it's
is,
not all
give
in
us
one
a plan how
community.
you're gonna get to your, this
Right.
is this was
And
the
that's
whole
what it's
reason
for.
behind it. How are you gonna get to your 10%? Tell us your strategies to get there.
Right.
And every 5 years, we wanna see your plan that you're doing something. So it's a 5
We said
year
that it gets
plan.
updated every 5 years to see where are you, how close are, you know, how much closer are you to the 10?
So people
But
are-
there's still no cumulative damage.
Right.
To a town that doesn't. So they don't say you get a 10-year window.
Yeah.
In 5-year increments, and you have to hit that benchmark.
Well-
Because what towns are doing.
But the impetus for it, but from the state, is that they can get the 830G, right? The
But they-
waiver of the zoning, which is huge.
But I think that, I can't speak for the state, obviously, but since this is the first time they're requiring it now,
Right,
maybe that is what they're going, because the same thing with the plan of conservation and developments, they have to be adopted every 10 years. And if you don't have your plan done every 10 years, you don't get discretionary funding, so you miss out on
That was
state
my
funding, that you don't get it because you didn't do your plan on time. I can't say that that's how it is with the affordable housing, but I'm saying, we don't know if that's where they're thinking the same
Where they
thing,
might be
that there will
heading.
be punitive, because the whole plan is for the plan of conservation development, you should be moving forward and thinking about the direction of your community and not doing nothing. And so
Years
that's
ago,
why
in the
they say-
legislature, they talked about punitive actions for people not trying to comply with the 10%. They never went there with it, but this could be the first step to it. We just don't know.
How much is that state funding, which they will be getting if they meet certain threshold? There's nothing like that either.
No, there's not, it
You
doesn't
know?
seem, there's no incentive.
There's no incentive
Right.
for towns.
But I think.
Or
I
money
think-
that town has to offer developer,
and-
except for the
Exactly.
provision that we have.
Right, and I think the incentive is, you know, at one point they talked about municipal, again, this is not here and it's not in the statute, but of affordable housing is having municipal agreements between communities. So say that you're next to a community that doesn't have sewer and
Right.
water, that you do it, like say like in Norwich would take that to affordable housing, but we get incentive for taking it. We get money from them.
From that town.
Basically, they're paying us to have their affordable housing, but we're agreeing to it. And so there's some of that because some places that don't have sewer and water really can't do big development.
Yeah.
And if they're only doing one house at a time being affordable, it could take them forever to get their 10%. But if they work some kind of agreement on, again, it's not in place now, work some kind of agreement out, then I'll take your affordable housing, but you're gonna pay us for it. We're gonna get something in return. And it's still close enough for people that live in that area to still take advantage. So it'd be something like communities that next to each other. Because obviously the state doesn't want to see every community going in and putting sewer and water in and having
Right.
sewer treatment plants and all those kind of things, and utility companies. So they may be looking at some point down the direction in cooperating between communities about it. Okay. Dan, is there anybody here that's that logged on that would want to speak? Is there anyone?
Nope.
Jeff, do you have any last comments?
No, I'm all set. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Dan. I appreciate it. I guess we'll call the public hearing at an end around 7 o'clock.
Yeah.
6:58.